Hi, I'm Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report. If you're walking through the airport right now, stop and watch this show. Forget the plane. It's not going anywhere important. Watch this show instead. Send the kids to the arcade. Watch this show. Hey, did you know that World War III started and has ended? Were you aware of that? By the time you left the pretzel stand on your way to the gate, World War III started, and now it's over. Let's get the details from political analyst Stacy Herbert.
Max, that's correct. World War III has apparently ended before it even started. The first headline reads, "Exit Harry Schultz, pursued by a bear." He is a legendary newsletter writer, Harry Schultz, a legendary bear as well. He says at the end of his newsletter that this pending war on Iran, which was the beginning of World War III, has actually ended before it started. And how can you tell? How do I know this, he asks? Follow the money, not the propaganda, he says. 4 U.S. banks are to open branches in Iran. Citibank and Goldman Sachs are among the first applicants. Since Goldman Sachs is the alternate or behind-the-scenes U.S. government, as we all know, that name, news, assured me of the good news.
Yes, well, Stacy Herbert, as you know, on this show, I said to Tehran, if you want to avoid getting bombed this fall by Israel/Goldman Sachs, allow Goldman Sachs and Citibank to open a bank in Tehran and therefore take out $1 billion or $10 or $100 billion in loans, and you won't get bombed.
Well, that's correct. So listen, you know,
I'm listening.
Somebody has a more artistic expression of going after these bankers. Taking on the bourse, Abby Hoffman style. Swedish artist Annika Lundgren attempted to levitate the Frankfurt Stock Exchange on Tuesday using the kinetic energy collected from supporters on the internet. The project is called The Stock is Rising.
Oh, we haven't heard Abby Hoffman's name in a while. For you kids out there, he was one of the activists that was around during the 1960s and during the previous century when only myself and Peter Lavelle were alive at that time. And we talked a lot about Abby Hoffman in those days, the civil rights marches and peace. Of course, now he's trying to levitate the Pentagon. This woman's trying to levitate the bourse in Frankfurt using telekinesis, Uri Geller style. She wants to just raise the bourse. You know, Ben Bernanke should try this with inflation in America because everything he's trying right now, quantitative easing, buying back toxic assets, jawboning the market, lying, cheating, stealing, it's not working. Deflation is tearing that economy apart. Joblessness is skyrocketing, and the average living quality of life situation over there in that hole between Mexico and Canada is going worse.
Well, you bring up something, Ben Bernanke, who is everybody in the whole U.S. economy is looking for to save the day. You know, whether it's political leaders or central bank leaders, they want them to rescue us, save us with your magical work. And that's something that this artist, Annika Lundgren, brought up. She said, I don't see the ambition to levitate the building, meaning the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, as less absurd than what is going on inside the building.
She's right. They both believe in an alchemist way of thinking, that they can somehow magically create GDP growth without massive amounts of debt creation. Keep in mind that during the last 20 years, Stacy Herbert, the GDP creation in the U.S. was accompanied by massive amounts of debt creation. 25 years ago, for every $1.50 or $2 in debt that was created, you had $1 in GDP growth. By 2007, it took $7 to $8 in debt before you ended up with $1 of GDP growth. Now, that's not a viable economy. That's a corpse that you're pumping in more debt, and you're calling that a viable economic entity. It's not. It's a dead corpse that you're just... It's absurd, and Ben Bernanke is a bit of a necrophiliac at this point.
But it's also Goldman Sachs and Citibank who are now applying to go into Iran. Unless you accept this magical thinking, apparently you're going to be bombed. And they are there in the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, they're in the New York Stock Exchange, they're in the London Stock Exchange, they're in the Shanghai Stock Exchange, creating magical thinking and turning assets into liabilities, wealth into debt, and that's what they're doing there.
Well, whoever decides to take on America's massive liabilities will escape the bombing of... See, America can only make money in two ways. Keep printing bad paper, bonds, or warfare. So it's either welfare bums or warfare bums. You've got welfare bums on Wall Street that are selling phony counterfeit bonds. And then you've got warfare bums in the Pentagon who start up ridiculous wars. You know, a lot of people say, hey, you know what? Since 9/11, there hasn't been another attack on the U.S. You know why? They don't need to attack the U.S. again. They did what they set out to do. The economy is destroyed. They're moving on to do other stuff. I mean, the U.S., it's done.
Well, speaking of done, here's the next headline. Downward mobility report. U.S. family income has tumbled steeply in the lost decade. The inflation-adjusted income of the median household, smack in the middle of the populace, fell 4.8% between 2000 and 2009, even worse than during the 1970s, when median income rose 1.9%, despite high unemployment and inflation.
Right, there's all that debt that they keep pumping into the corpse and saying it's GDP growth. It's not GDP growth, and then it got saturated. There's only so much formaldehyde debt you can pump into this corpse before it starts to stink to high heaven, and then you got to say, oh, it's a dead duck, and we can't stuff no more debt there no more.
Well, the remarkable thing about that, 2000 to 2009, so incomes of people who work, who have a job in America, fell by 4.8%. Yet the years 2000 to 2009, what does one think? One thinks of a massive spending binge, the shopping binge to end all shopping binges. Americans went on a crazy consumer binge, buying houses, buying all sorts of things, cars, vacations, iPads.
Okay, and that income did not come from wages. It came from borrowing against their house that was being pumped up artificially by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and Wall Street. Then the party ended, the house prices collapsed, and you're just left there with a falling wage. No asset, no net worth, and no country. Right? I mean, that's where the spending power came from. They're borrowing from debt. That's what we're talking about. The American experience of shopping came all not from wages. They haven't worked a day in their life for decades. They've been living in the largesse of the Chinese for decades. They don't know how to work anymore. They're bums. America is bums. They're either welfare bums or warfare bums. You've got nobody who's working a day in their life anymore.
So their incomes are falling, but they keep on consuming. So look what happens in Europe, in Greece, when incomes are falling, people stop consuming. And look what happens. Greeks get cheaper IKEA shelves as prices drop in recession. IKEA slashed the price of Billy bookshelves, whatever those are, in Greece by 22%. Francette Koechlin, a statistician at the OECD, explains, for Greece and Ireland, it's a question of supply and demand. People aren't buying, so they cut their prices. The U.S. doesn't have any of the market mechanisms anymore. They have no free market capitalism. They don't have any of these price discovery mechanisms.
That's right. How many of the homes in America are controlled by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? The vast majority. They are not allowing market prices to exert themselves. They're not allowing the market to trade down to reflect the demand. They're artificially keeping prices high for housing in America. It's a zombie economy for this very reason. The only thing that anyone creating policy in the U.S. government should do right now is to let housing fall to where supply is equal to demand. Stop subsidizing housing immediately. All you're doing is prolonging the agony. Obama, you're a sadist for allowing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to continue to support house prices as you are doing. You are a sadist, sir. You deserve in the Marquis de Sade house of sadism.
But they're zombies with credit cards, and these credit cards are refusing. It gives them purchasing power that would not otherwise exist, sending false signals to the market. So people keep on producing stuff for this economy where the people are zombies. But it also is like a sci-fi futuristic war movie. It's like they have zombies who continue to support wars that they can't even afford to buy their own food, let alone supporting. Where are they getting the luxury to invade all these countries?
Well, it's being cut off, from them by these other countries. Again, this is the point I'm trying to make, Stacy Herbert, is that you don't need to attack the U.S. anymore. The job is finished. The economy is being drained. It's bleeding out. To use a term from one of those cop shows where the victim is always bleeding out. Okay, the U.S. economy is bleeding out because it's dead. Okay, let's stop talking about it in the present. Let's talk about it in the past. The U.S. 1776, 2008. It's done. Put a fork in it. It's finished.
Here's another headline that proves that it is the end of the beginning of something new. Innovation shifted to China during the downturn, UN report. So the World Intellectual Property Organization said that patent applications in China jumped by 18.2% in 2008 and 8.5% in 2009. This contrasts to the U.S., where it fell by 11.7% in the same time. Now, WIPO says China is moving up the value chain and rapidly increasing exports based on domestic innovation.
Well, Andy Grove made that point, former CEO of Intel. America felt they could ship all the low-paying jobs to China and keep all the innovation. But lo and behold, now China has both the jobs and the innovation.
Well, of course, the transition from one empire to the next always ends ugly. As we know, World War I, World War II was during the end of the British Empire. And we talked about the ending of World War III, which apparently never happened. Here's World War IV. Chinese-Japanese relations in chaos amid disputes over currency, natural gas, and a detained fishing captain. Apparently, Japan found out that China was secretly buying up government bonds in order to drive up the price of the yen, the value of the yen.
That's right. There's World War IV, as you point out, between the currency trading that's going to go on. China and Japan now are openly battling in the currency pits, as we've been talking about on this show for a long time. This current World War, will be fought in the currency pits. I'm rooting for China. I think Japan, what I don't like about Japan's situation is that they have painted themselves as pacifists for so many years. And yet, who's financed America's Iraq War, Afghanistan War, and all this other stuff? It's Japanese money. Japanese money has financed America's wars, so they're not pacifists.
Well, some say Japan is an extension of the U.S. Central Bank. So
yeah, the Bank of Japan and J.P. Morgan and the Federal Reserve Bank, they're all joined in one confab daisy chain of unholy currency manipulation. And, of course, you got Geithner saying, oh, China's a currency manipulator. Meanwhile, the Japanese yen was openly and obviously manipulated just recently to help America fund their purchases of all these Chinese-made goods. They're obviously manipulating the currency, so Geithner talking out of both sides of mouth, hypocritical, nonsensical, neoliberal nincompoop, once again taking America's economy down into the gutter. Tim Geithner, yuck! All right, Stacy Herbert, that's all the time for we have this week. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. When we come back, we're going to New York City to speak with stock market addict and day trading fiend Joe Wiesenthal of BusinessInsider.com.
Hungry for the full story? We've got it firsthand. The biggest issues get a human voice, face to face with the newsmakers on RT.
Yes, welcome back to the Keiser Report. Now for a special treat, we go to New York City to speak with stock market junkie Joe Wiesenthal of BusinessInsider.com. Joe, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me.
Joe, just a quick question. What's the best pizza in New York City?
I don't know. I think you know the answer better than me. Okay. Which one is it?
Let's move on. All right, I'll tell you. Clearly, you're not up on what makes New York, New York. All right. Now, Joe, I'm looking at this headline. Bed bugs are the new sexually transmitted disease in New York. What is happening in New York City?
They're everywhere. They're in the Abercrombie and Fitch store. They're in the Victoria's Secret store. They're in airplanes. They're in movie theaters. They're at the Nike store. Everyone's freaking out about them. I think bed bugs are up like tenfold in the last few years. Supposedly, they say bed bugs were almost eradicated completely off the face of the earth until they banned DDT. A brilliant stroke of insight there. And then ever since then, they've been climbing, and I guess they've hit some elbow in the curve, and now they've just taken off everywhere.
I heard the main source, really. They're hiding in Donald Trump's hair.
That is unverified, unprovable, but, it's certainly as good of a theory as any, I suppose.
But so these bed bugs are supposed to be resistant to the pesticides, and they are forcing stores like Nike Town in Midtown to close down. This is a huge retailing space. I mean, in retailing, like in the hotel business, every day that goes by, you're not booking sales, you never get that back. Now, this has got to have an economic impact. Is New York going back to $47 for the whole island?
I don't think it'll be quite that bad. I don't think we're going to get reduced to that, but this could be the shock that puts us into the double dip that everyone's been fearing about. This could be it.
All right. Now, Joe, why does Business Insider, and you in particular, hate gold?
I don't hate gold. I love getting the gold people riled up. There's a big difference. I own a little bit of gold. I don't have anything against it, but the gold's believers are so fervent and so religious in their beliefs, it's impossible to not be tempted to poke at them and see and watch them scream a little bit.
But Joe, you are a paper bug, okay? You are a paper bug. You believe in the sanctity of fiat currencies and the orthodoxy of the Federal Reserve Bank, and you're going down on a torch on a cross of gold, Joe. You're going down.
That's right. No, that's fair. You totally have the right to attack me as a paper bug and watch me squirm, whatever. I mean, whether I am or not is beside the point. But I enjoy the back and forth with the gold bug.
Incidentally, by the way, who is the only global newscaster in the world over the past several years that's been absolutely 100% right about gold?
I've heard that it's you, Max Keiser. I think it might be you.
All right, very good. Let's talk about China and the yuan. What's going on there? Are they currency manipulators? Are they not currency manipulators? Is the economy a bubble? Is it going to bust? What's happening?
Well, they're definitely currency manipulators. I mean, there's no way that anyone's economy stays. They're admitted currency manipulators. They have their currency fixed. I don't know whether their economy is a bubble. What I do know is that the tensions are getting real, and up until like a couple of weeks ago, it was all about the U.S. versus China, the tensions there, and now suddenly in the last several days, it's all about China versus Japan. Japan just intervened to weaken its yen.
Now, wait a minute. Japan just intervened to weaken its yen. That sounds like currency manipulation.
Everyone's a currency manipulator. Every World Bank has a point where they want to see their currency add, and they think it's most beneficial to their exporters or their consumers if they want a strong currency. So it's just this global game wherever it's a poker game, and all the world's central bankers are sitting around a table trying to push chips to one side or another, and it's never going to end. There's never going to be a period so long, I guess, as we have fiat currency where central bankers aren't manipulating their currency. And it's nothing, it's just the cycle will go on forever, right? And it's just a matter of where the tension is. Right now, the tension is Japan and China. And there also happen to be, geopolitical situations. There's this, fishing boat captain from China who's, being held in detention in Japan, and that's creating political tension. There's a dispute about a natural gas field that both countries are. So all of a sudden there's a lot of tension between the two countries, and it's playing out on the currency front.
Right, and the number one currency manipulator in the world is the U.S. and the U.S. dollar, and the number one way they manipulate the currency is by artificially keeping the price of gold down through Goldman Sachs and these other market manipulators. But let's move on. You have recently written, quote, will seniors...
Wait. But they're suppressing the price of gold artificially, which you say when it is at an all-time high. I mean, what other artificially suppressed commodity is at an all-time high?
The gold bull hasn't even started yet, Joe. This gold move is still in a bear market. Had it been allowed to trade naturally based on supply and demand for the last 10 years, it would already be at $2,500, which is the inflation-adjusted price. It's still cheap relative to where inflation has been, and it's clearly with J.P. Morgan shorting tens of thousands of silver futures contracts over there at the COMEX and selling short, naked short selling. It's so immoral, Joe. It's so unethical, Joe. Your own banks in your own city are committing fraud, massive fraud, by naked short selling silver futures contracts.
All right, you better stop. You're making me lose my composure. I'm cracking up. So what's the next subject?
All right, Joe. We'll let you go on that one. Let's talk about, you recently wrote, will senior citizens force America into another deflationary lost decade? Talk about this.
Well, this is one of the big ideas about why Japan has suffered for so long, which is that basically its aging population has been very much in favor of deflation. When you're on a fixed income, when your investments are usually of the fixed income bond type, you want to see deflation. That's good for your cost of living. It's good for your investments. And so the government basically kowtows to the senior citizens. And we could have the same situation here where you see a lot of people, they already own their home, they're on a fixed income, they're on Social Security, and basically maybe would benefit much of the population to see more inflation, but because our seniors are so well organized here, the AARP, and they actually go to vote, unlike other people, it could just be that as a policy decision, we basically maintain the deflation to appease one of the most powerful political blocs.
So when you sit down for Seder or Thanksgiving with your parents, you say, Mom, Dad, we're not going to kowtow to you anymore. We're going to cut you off.
No, I'm not going to say that. I'll change the subject if they ask me about it. In defense of seniors, I mean, well, that sounds a little bit ridiculous. But, obviously, they get blamed for a lot of stuff unfairly. I mean, they get blamed for all the Social Security and healthcare costs, and people
Joe,
say
your mom gave birth to you. Now you want to stick her on an iceberg and float her out to the water to be eaten by polar bears and sharks.
No, that's exactly.
What's wrong
I don't
with
want
you,
to do that
Joe?
yet. So
These are the people who raised you. Now you want to throw them onto the scrap heap. Joe, what's going on?
I don't want to do that yet. In fairness to them, I don't think that they're the cause of all economic problems we see.
All right, I'm going to talk to your mother, Joe, Mrs. Wiesenthal, about this and see what she has to say about this. On the other end of the spectrum, the under 25s, you've got unemployment rate above 20% in the under 25 age bracket. This is a lost generation. This is the worst employment environment, I think, in 40 years.
Right.
And so you've got a whole generation now coming into the workforce there is no work to be part of the force. How is this? How do you see this in New York and around the country? I mean, what is happening with this new generation? I would imagine you're almost a part of that new generation yourself, Joe Wiesenthal.
Yeah, it's kind of a real bummer for this generation. I mean, obviously the job market is pretty terrible, but young people, I know a lot of people in this generation, and a lot of them have taken out unrealistic amounts of money to pay for college, to get degrees that never really had great employment prospects, even in a good economy. I think there is something to this idea that after 100, decades of a strong, robust economy, that eventually the country kind of goes soft. And I think that criticism is probably warranted on some of the 30 or 25 and unders that have kind of gone soft and weak and not really, maybe need some time to toughen up.
All right, so you're recommending some kind of intergenerational warfare. So you and your 25 and unders are going to go to war with grandma and grandpa to make sure they don't get any of that retirement money that they worked their lives to secure.
That's exactly what I'm advocating. Exactly.
All right, so you're organizing your under 25 force of Generation Z. I guess at this point we're at the running out of letters in the alphabet like those hurricanes at the top.
I think it's back up to double A now.
Back to double A, the hurricane generation double A. All right, so consumers in the U.S., there's talk of that they are scaling back, deleveraging, pulling back. Is that true? I see a lot of these Apple products flying off the shelves. Where's that money coming from?
Well, they're only spending it on Apple products. That's actually the funny thing. In every regard, basically, they're deleveraging. They're still cutting up their credit cards. Their household wealth is evaporating, so that's no longer any kind of source of cash. They're spending on basic necessities, food, shelter, clothing, and Apple products.
But Apple products are a huge seller. Is it? There's talk that the folks who are walking away from their mortgages and they're not paying their mortgage down, their debt anymore, they've gone negative equity. Yeah. They suddenly have an increase in that monthly discretionary expense, so-called, and they're out buying iPads and iPhones. But, I mean, it seems superfluous on one hand, but on the other hand, these are fairly sophisticated tools and computers that you can use them to be productive in some way. I mean,
well, not only that, but I mean, actually last week, I think it was the CEO of Best Buy said that iPads were actually cannibalizing pretty significantly sales of laptops and computers. So actually, rather than looking at this as a big expense, maybe the proper way we should be thinking about it is further evidence of deleveraging. that they're saving money by buying an iPad rather than a full-fledged computer. So it appears to be an extravagant purchase. It's actually a cost-saving move, and therefore perfectly consistent with everything else.
Of course, the federal government will have to make an hedonic adjustment to account for iPad versus laptop and to showcase how productive the economy is.
I'm curious to see how that shows up in the CPI.
All right, finally, your thoughts on these midterm elections that are coming out. Democrats look like they're losing big. If I go to intrade.com to get the latest on the prediction market, I think it's indicating Democrats are going to lose big. What could Obama have done differently?
Nothing. He couldn't have done anything differently. They're going to get swamped. It's going to be like 94, but it probably is going to help Obama. I mean, if you put him up next to Christine O'Donnell for the next 2 years, that's probably his best shot of getting reelected in 2012.
Sounds bleak. All right, well, we'll have to have you on again soon to catch up. And by the way,
I don't have better news for you.
The best pizza in New York is on McDougal Street at a place called Ben's. Hopefully it's still there. Haven't been in New York City in over 10 years, but it's probably still there. It is the best pizza in New York. Joe Wiesenthal, thanks again for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with Max Keiser and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Joe Wiesenthal from BusinessInsider.com. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.